Before starting this video, I do want to give a thank you to my patrons that support the channel. And if you would like to support the channel, there are some great benefits for you in the link down below. So with that, let's get into today's video. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin coming back at you with another video today on PubStomp MTG. So with this video, I'm going to go over the Masters of Evil Precon product that came out for Doctor Who with the collaboration with Magic the Gathering. So this is a pretty cool product. I'm not too familiar with Doctor Who. I'm not a Doctor Whoven, if that's the term. Again, do not crucify me. I don't know this product as well as I should, but this is a very cool thing. It kind of got me a little interested. I looked at a couple different videos just to see what Doctor Who is about, and honestly it looks pretty cool, so I might dive into it a little bit further on. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the Masters of Evil and talk about some of the cards that are in there. So what's very cool about this deck and a lot of the other decks that are in the new Doctor Who set is they have a bunch of new legendary creatures. For example, we do have this front-facing commander with Davros Dalek Creator. So this is an alien scientist, which is pretty neat, and a legendary artifact creature, so himself is an artifact. There's a lot of artifact synergies in the deck to utilize. He also does read at the beginning of your end step, create a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with Menace. If an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, then each opponent who lost 3 or more life this turn faces a villainous choice. You draw a card or that player discards a card. So this is a pretty cool commander. I do feel like there's a lot going on with this one, specifically making artifact tokens, also on top of that drawing cards or making people discard cards. We do have another Grixis commander in this deck with Ashad the Lone Cyberman. So for 4 mana, the first non-legendary artifact spell you cast each turn has Casualty 2, and whenever you sacrifice another creature, you put a 1/1 counter on Ashad the Lone Cyberman. So overall, this could be powerful in the right type of deck. For example, if you do have a lot of creatures on the battlefield, you can constantly sacrifice them for that Casualty 2 ability so that you could double up on your artifact spells. Plus, potentially, he could become a bigger and bigger threat each time you sacrifice another creature, putting a 1/1 counter on it, so this could be very powerful in the right type of strategy. Also, as you can see, this is very similar to Anhelo the Painter having that ability of Casualty 2 whenever you cast your first instant or sorcery, but in this case, a first artifact. And the last Grixis commander I'm going to talk about is Missy. This is a very powerful effect on this creature. For 6 mana, whenever another non-artifact creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control face down and tapped. It's a 2/2 Cyberman artifact creature. She also does read, at the beginning of your end step, each opponent faces a villainous choice. Each artifact creature you control deals 1 damage to that opponent, or you draw a card and chaos ensues. So as a reminder, it's any creature that dies that's a non-artifact. So this could fill your board with Cybermen, essentially trying to deal damage to your opponents or giving you card draws. So this is a great option as a commander. However, in this video, I am going to go over Davros Dalek Creator as the main commander of this deck, mainly because it has a great ability, having Menace, and also having that ability to make tokens on the battlefield. Plus, you could potentially draw 3 cards, or if your opponents want to discard cards, they could do so. So in my opinion, this is one of the better commanders in the deck. I mean, you can pick any one of them. They're not going to be a downside by any means because you're really having a lot of artifact synergies in the deck. Speaking of which, I do want to talk about some of the new cards that are in the deck. And I will say this is split up into 2 different themes for artifact creatures with Daleks and also Cybermen. And I'll tell you what, there is so much new cards, so much new legendaries to build around. That's what makes this precon very exciting, like the Dalek Emperor. So for 5 black and a red, it's an artifact creature Dalek. Affinity for Daleks and other Daleks you control have haste. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, each opponent faces a villainous choice. That player sacrifices a creature they control, or you create a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with Menace. So what's really incredible about the villainous choice is the fact that each opponent that you have will have that villainous choice to make, so up to 3 targets or even more. I mean, there's some cases where if you knock out an opponent, there'll be like maybe 2 or even 1 opponent left, and you only have that choice just once. But in most cases, you'll have 3 opponents where you could either make them either sacrifice a creature, or you'll make 3 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature tokens with Menace. So with this card overall, I mean, if it was a Grixis card, I would consider it to be the commander because this is very powerful, having that ability to make tokens or making people sacrifice creatures. But this in the right type of deck could be very powerful, especially the more Daleks you have on the battlefield, the more you can reduce its mana cost. Another legendary I do want to point out is the Cyber Controller. So for X, blue, blue, and a black, we have a legendary artifact creature Cyberman. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills X cards. Put all creature cards milled this way onto the battlefield face down under your control. They're 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures, and other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. So if anything else, you could put this on the battlefield just for 3 mana, and all your artifact creatures will get +1/+1. So this just by itself is pretty good. I mean, this essentially can be an infinite mana outlet if you do have Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal. Say for example, you get infinite mana, you could just pay into that X ability so that you can mill everybody out so that you have a huge army of Cybermen. Then you could just pass the turn, making everybody lose one after the other. So I will say the more the game does go on, the better this card will be. I mean, if anything else, again, I mentioned previously, this is just an anthem for all your artifact creatures, so this just by itself is pretty good. We do also have some other Cybermen with Cybermen Squadron. So this ability reads, non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad. So what's very nice about this effect is the fact that it doesn't say non-token artifact creatures, so tokens can apply when you're doing that Myriad effect. So if you do have a lot of Cybermen or Dalek creatures on the battlefield, they're all going to be artifacts, and then when you swing in with them, you could potentially make 2 token copies of them depending on how much players you have on the battlefield. So if you do have a lot of artifact creatures that have a lot of good ETBs, this is just a shoe-in. Of course, this is a great card in the deck, especially when you have a lot of artifact creatures on the battlefield. I did also want to talk about a great board wipe with Doomsday Confluence. So for XX and a red, choose X. You may choose the same mode more than once. Each player sacrifices a non-artifact creature, or you make a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with Menace, or each opponent discards a card. So in the right type of situations, this could be very powerful. Each player will sacrifice a non-artifact creature. That's not going to be a big deal for us because we'll only have artifact creatures on the battlefield. Plus we can make more Daleks on the battlefield, and we could potentially make our opponents discard a lot of cards. So the more we do pay into this, the bigger effect we will get off of it. I did also want to discuss another Myriad card with Auton Soldier. So for 6 mana, it can enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's not legendary, and it's an artifact in addition to its other types, and has Myriad. So again, this copies any creature on the battlefield, whether it's one of your opponent's biggest creatures on the battlefield, or if it's one of your own commanders. It's a complete okay thing to do because it will not be legendary on the battlefield, so the legendary rule won't apply, so you don't have to sacrifice your commander. Plus, if you do have a good ETB on a commander specifically, or say for example, somebody's playing Atraxa Grand Unifier and you copy it, it will have Myriad so that when you swing in with it, you potentially will make 2 other Atraxas on the battlefield that you could just have a great ETB and then draw a lot of cards off of that. So as a clone card by itself, I know 6 mana is pretty steep, but it's pretty rewarding depending on what you do with it, especially if you copy a creature that has an ETB. That's incredible. So this is a good card. Another card I do want to mention, mainly because of the name, is the Beast. So it's a legendary demon. When you cast a spell, gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap it, it gains menace and haste until end of turn. The downside is the fact that it will enter the battlefield with 6 stun counters on it. However, it does have an upside. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to its owner, untap the beast and draw a card. So this is just a fun card in the deck. Nowhere near is it actually flavorful towards the commanders that we're going to be choosing to upgrade this Precon, but I feel like in a general sense, if you do plan on building this outside of the deck, you'd want a lot of those red effects where you could take control of creatures, giving them haste, and then swinging into their opponents so that you could draw a card and untap the beast. So there's a lot of ways to do that, like having Insurrection, for example. I feel like in a good amount of scenarios, this could be pretty powerful. I mean, if somebody has a Blightsteel Colossus on the battlefield, you could just take control of it, then swing into that opponent that had it so that you no longer have to deal with the Blightsteel Colossus. But in a general sense, I don't think this is going to be the most popular commander out of the entire deck, but I mean, who knows? We'll see as we go along if people want to build this or not. But if you do want me to build this commander or any of the other commanders that I previously mentioned, let me know down below in the comments. I'll totally do that. I do like to build around some of these commanders because they look very fun overall. With that said, we're going to talk about a commander that's not actually legendary with Sycorax Commander. So we have an Alien Soldier, first strike and haste. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent faces a villainous choice. That opponent discards all cards in their hand and then draws that many cards -1, or Sycorax Commander deals damage to that player equal to the number of cards in their hand. So again, I don't know why this is not legendary because it does have a cool ability. It's a commander, so it's kind of referring to itself as a legendary creature. I mean, again, I'm not going to nitpick too much. It does have a pretty powerful ability, essentially making people wheel And if they don't want to wheel the cards that they do have in their hand, they can take damage based off the amount of cards in their hand. Plus it has decent stats being a first strike and haste and being a 4/2 body. So I feel like this is a cool card to mention. However, I don't feel like it really fits the theme of artifacts in our deck. I mean, I did want to mention it because it's a very powerful card. There's a lot of powerful cards in this deck that are new and exciting. Those are some of the cards I just wanted to talk about today. But I will say there's a great selection of reprints in the deck. There's a lot of ones you may want to consider keeping in the deck because they're just great with their commander, like Wound Reflection. So for 6 mana at the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. So this is a pretty insane card. This is not going to affect us by any means because an opponent loses life. We're not going to be losing life based off of this effect alone. So the more we deal damage to our opponents, the more they're going to be losing life. And when they deal damage to each other, they're going to be losing more life in the process on each turn. So this is a very powerful effect. I did also want to touch on Lightning Greaves, mainly because it's a great card to protect your commander or a creature that you do control. Equipped creature has haste and shroud. I feel like no matter how many times they reprint this card, it's always going to be like $5 to $10. But it does make sense. It's a great equip cost of 0, and just for 2 mana, just to protect your commander. This is just a great spell in any kind of deck you want to have your commander protected. Also, not just in this deck, but all the decks, we did get a reprint of the Modern Horizons lands, for example with Fiery Islet. These are such great cards because if you want to pay mana to play some spells, you totally can do that. But if you do have a lot of mana and you don't necessarily need that mana and you want to get some card draw, you could just sacrifice the land to draw a card. These are excellent in any kind of deck you want to do that. In all the other decks, they got 2 of these lands, but in this deck, they only got 1 of these effects in the deck, so that's unfortunate on this deck, but there's a lot of good other lands in the deck, no question about it. I did also want to discuss Blasphemous Act. This is one of the classic board wipes in Commander in red. It has that ability. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield, so the more creatures on the battlefield, this could potentially cost just 1 red. And it'll deal 13 damage to each creature, so essentially it will kill any creature on the battlefield that's not indestructible. The last notable reprint, I do want to talk about Propaganda. I know it's a classic all-star in Commander as well, same as Blasphemous Act. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 mana for each creature they control that's attacking you. So this is more of a pillow fort strategy. The more of these cards you do have in your deck, the more opponents are likely not going to attack you. So this is a good option if you want to just go with your villainous schemes and try to win the game that way. So with all that said, let's also talk about some cards I would add personally into the deck. If you notice down below in the deck list, I do have the cards that are taken out in the sideboard, and I also put the cards that I put in the actual deck list. So if you do want to go check that out, it'll be in the Moxfield link. So the first card I would suggest is actually Emery, Lurker of the Lock, mainly because for 2 and a blue, the spell costs 1 less for each artifact you control. Essentially, it'll most likely be just 1 blue mana each time you just cast it, and it enters the battlefield, you mill 4 cards, and then you could tap her to choose a target artifact card in your graveyard, and you could cast it this turn. This is excellent in the deck, just in case if you have that artifact in your graveyard that you desperately want to play so that you could potentially win the game. You could easily do that with Emery by tapping her so that you could play that artifact. I did also want to bring your attention to Joyra, Weatherlight Captain. For 2 blue and a red, we have a legendary creature, Human Artificer. Whenever you cast a historic spell, you draw a card. So artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic. So in this deck, this is a great value engine because we have a lot of artifact spells that we're going to be casting, a lot of different legendary cards that we're going to be casting, and also on top of that, there actually is some sagas in the deck that we could cast as well. So with this card, you could constantly refill your hand left and right when you're casting more artifact, legendaries, or saga spells. So I feel like personally this is just a shoe-in in the deck, no question about it. Another card that synergizes with artifacts is Padim, Console of Innovation. So for 3 and a blue, artifacts you control have hexproof. Also, it does read at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact with the highest mana value or tied with the highest mana value, you draw a card. So I mainly like this because you could give your commander hexproof and all the Daleks you control have hexproof and all the Cybermen. So honestly, this is a great fit because you want a way where you can protect your creatures left and right with targeted removal, and you don't have to worry about that when they have hexproof. Plus, you do have more ways of drawing cards, so this is a great fit in the deck. Also, because you are making a lot of different tokens, you might as well include Brutaclad Telecore Engineer, mainly because creature tokens you control have haste. That alone is pretty great. We want a lot of our Daleks or Cybermen to be attacking. Also on top of that, at the beginning of your combat on your turn, you create a 2/1 blue mirror artifact creature token. Then you may choose a token you control. If you do, each token you control becomes a copy of that token. So Broodclad is a very popular commander just by itself, having that ability of making your tokens just be a copy of one token. But on top of that, if you want to make them all into beefy beaters, you could easily do so. But the next card I do want to add into the list is more of a great synergistic part with your artifacts with Enthusiastic Mechanaut. And the main reason why I added this in here is pretty simple. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, so that just by itself is pretty great. We have a lot of artifacts that we do want to be casting, whether they're creature artifacts or just artifacts by themselves. They'll just cost 1 less to cast with this card on the battlefield. If we do want a way we could recur our artifacts, Mishra, Tamer of Makfawa is pretty incredible. It has that incredible ability of permanents you control have ward, sacrifice a permanent. So that by itself will deter your opponents from having targeted removal on your creatures. Plus on top of that, each artifact card in your graveyard has unearth, 1 black and a red. So this easily is one of the best cards in the deck, mainly because if you want to have that last chance of reusing a card in your graveyard, you can easily do so. And it's any artifact, whether it's an artifact creature or an artifact permanent. So I love this card for what it's doing. Another card that was from Brothers War is also Blast Furnace Hellkite for 7 and 2 red pips. It does have that ability, Artifact Offering. You may cast a spell as though it had flash by sacrificing an artifact and paying the difference in mana cost between this and the sacrifice artifact's mana value. So what's nice about this card, just by that ability alone, is the fact that it will have flash and you can essentially cast this for free almost, and it does have that ability of flying and double strike. Creatures attacking your opponents have double strike. So if you do have a lot of Cybermen or Daleks swinging away for victory, you could give them double strike to ensure it, because your Daleks will have menace and will be 3/3s, so they'll essentially swing it for 6 damage each. So this could potentially close out the game by using that ability of giving your creatures double strike. But if you really do want to drain your opponents for victory, you could use cards like Marionette Master and Mirkwood Bats. With Marionette Master, it has that incredible ability whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So in most cases, you want to put 3 1/1 counters on Marionette Master so that it could be a 4/6 on the battlefield, so that whenever an artifact you control like a Dalek or a Cyberman enters the graveyard, you could drain an opponent for 4 life. But with Mirkwood Bats, this could be quite insane in the deck, mainly because if your opponents are facing a villainous choice, you can make 3 3/3 Daleks on the battlefield, and then your opponents will lose 3 life each. And this is all based off of the commander that we're building around too, by the way. Plus, Daleks and Cybermen are going to be entering the battlefield left and right, so you're going to be draining your opponents so much, and if they do enter the graveyard, they're just going to be drained by so much more. So these are absolutely great cards in the deck so that you could drain your opponents to victory. So that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and watching this video on this Precon product that just came out. I feel like this is going to be a very fun one. Again, I'm a big Grixis fan, so the Masters of Evil looks like a very enticing one for me to play personally. However, let me know down below in the comments, are you planning on buying this Precon? Do you feel like it's a good Precon? What cards would you add in or add out? Let me know again down below in the comments. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And with that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.